Hi, welcome to all to EduGarden tutorial. We are discussing today from UGC Net History subject. Topic is Indian History, Concepts, Ideas and Terms. First one, Bharatvarsha. It is ancient name of India. It means the land of the people who belong to Bharata clan. Next, Sabha and Samiti. Several tribal or the clan-based assemblies such as the Sabha, Samiti, Vidada and Gana are mentioned Rigveda. The Sabha was probably a council of elders and nobles. The Sabha was probably a council of elders and nobles. The speaker of Sabha was called Sabhapati and its members Sabhya. The speaker of Sabha was called Sabhapati and its members Sabhya. The Samiti was the national assembly of the whole people. The Samiti was the national assembly of the whole people. The members of the Samiti were called Visha. The members of the Samiti were called Visha. The most important function of the Samiti was the election of the king. The election of the king. The most important function of the Samiti was the election of the king. Next one, Varnasrama. The social structure based on Varna system and ashramas was known as Varnasrama. The later Vedic society came to be divided into four Varnas called the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. Ashramas or four stages of life were not well established in Vedic times. The earliest clear reference to the four ashramas, that of Brahmachari or student, Grihastha or household, Vanaprastha or hermit and Sannyasi or ascetic. The principle of Varnashrama Dharma is one of the basic principles of Hinduism. Next one, purusharthas. In Vedic literature, purusharthas are referred as objectives of human life. These objectives are four in number, that is dharma, artha, kama and moksha. Dharma, fulfillment of duty and performance of virtue. Fulfillment of duty and performance of virtue, that's dharma. Artha, obtaining material gain. Obtaining material gain. And then kama, satisfying sexual desires. Then moksha, renunciation of worldly life in order to obtain liberation from self. These four are also called the four paths. Chadurvaya. These four are also called the four paths. Chadurvaya. Next one, Rina. What's the term? Rina. Rina in Hindu religion is the debt which a person owes to his parents, teachers, elders and gods, etc. And it is said that he, cannot salvation until or unless he has cleared off his debt. This could be done through sacrifices and donations. We find mentions of Pitra Rina, Deva Rina, Guru Rina and Aditi Rina, etc. Yajna. It literally means sacrifice. It literally means sacrifice. Yajna refers to utterance of religious formulae by priest while performing various rituals and samskaras. Yajna. It literally means sacrifice. What? It literally means sacrifice. Yajnas refers to utterance of religious formulae by priests while performing various rituals and samskaras. Sacrifices were also accompanied by formulae which had to be carefully pronounced by the sacrificer. Sacrifices were also accompanied by formulae which had to be carefully pronounced by the sacrificer. The sacrificer was known as the Yajamana. The sacrificer was known as the Yajamana. The performer of Yajna and much of his success depended on the magical power of words uttered correctly in the sacrifices. Yajna, a mean to save the worldly creatures from natural hazards in Vedic period, became a way to attain heavenly position in Brahmanic period. Samskaras. Samskaras were the impressions of previous karma. Samskaras were the impressions of previous karma. During the later Vedic period, elaborate rituals and performance of different ceremonies called samskaras were emphasized. During the later Vedic period, elaborate rituals and performance of different ceremonies called samskaras were emphasized. These rituals and ceremonies were accompanied by yajnas. These rituals and ceremonies were accompanied by yajnas. A man was expected to perform different samskaras during his lifetime. A man was expected to perform different samskaras during his lifetime. Okay, next one, doctrine of karma. It is a Hindu doctrine. According to this doctrine, as a man acts, so shall he be. The law of karma is the counterpart in the moral world of the physical law of uniformity. The law of karma is the counterpart in the moral world of the physical law of uniformity. We make our future thoughts, actions and feelings of the past have fashioned our present, and our present deeds will determine our future when we are reborn. What? We make our future thoughts, actions and feelings of the past have fashioned our present, and our present deeds will determine our future when we are reborn. No person can escape the consequences of his or her deeds. There is a retribution for selfishness and reward for noble acts. Not only men, but also angels, gods, animals, in brief, all are subject to the great law of karma. Not only men, but also angels, gods, animals, in brief, all are subject to the great law of karma. Dandanidhi. Dandanidhi is the term used by Kaudilya in his work Arthashastra to represent policy of government. Dandanidhi is the term used by Kaudilya in his work Arthashastra to represent policy of government. Policy of government. Kaudilya's famous work is Arthashastra. That's very important. Arthashastra. Arthashastra. Arthashastra was written by Vishnugupta Kaudilya, also known as Chanakya. Arthashastra was written by Kaudilya, also known as Chanakya. Also known as Chanakya. He was the Prime Minister of Chandragupta Maurya. He was the Prime Minister of Chandragupta Maurya. It is very important. It is the most important source for writing the history of the Mauryas and is divided into 15 Adhikaranas or sections and 180 Prakaranas or subdivisions. It has about 6,000 slokas. It has about 6,000 slokas. The book was discovered by Samskaras in 1909 and ably translated by him. The book was discovered by Samskaras in 1909 and ably translated by him. Arthashastra is standard work on politics and art of government. Arthashastra is standard work on politics and art of government. Next, Dhamma Vijaya. Dhamma Vijaya. Mauryan King Ashoka guided his public behavior according to the Dhamma. Mauryan King Ashoka guided his public behavior according to the Dhamma. He stopped animal fighting and other such entertainments and instead encouraged religious fairs and festivals. He stopped animal fighting and other such entertainments and instead encouraged religious fairs and festivals. After his conquest of Kalinga, he stopped wars of conquest and started Dhamma Vijaya with propagation of religion. After his conquest of Kalinga, he stopped wars of conquest and started Dhamma Vijaya with propagation of religion. Chaitya. It was the Buddhist temple. It was the Buddhist temple. The Chaitya was a large hall with a number of columns. The Chaitya was a large hall with a number of columns. The most famous Chaitya is that of Kar in the Western Deccan. It is about 40 meters long, 15 meters wide and 15 meters high. The most famous Chaitya is that of Kar in the Western Deccan. It is about 40 meters long, 15 meters wide and 15 meters high. Next one, Stupa. The stupa was a large round structure erected over some relic of the Buddha. The stupa was a large round structure erected over some relic of the Buddha. The stupa appeared as dome-like structures on round bases, mainly of stone. The most famous stupas are Amaravati and Nagarjunakonda. The most famous stupas are first one Amaravati and the next one Nagarjunakonda. Amaravati and Nagarjunakonda. Ashoka is credited with building 84,000 stupas all over India and Afghanistan. Ashoka is credited with building 84,000 stupas all over India and Afghanistan. 84,000 stupas all over India and Afghanistan. Styles of temple building. First one, Nagara style. This style of temple architecture developed from 5th century AD onwards. 5th century AD onwards, Nagara style. This style of temple architecture developed from 5th century AD onwards. There are presence of assembly halls or mandaps in front of the principal shrine. There are no water tanks or reservoirs present in the temple premises. There are no water tanks or reservoirs present in the temple premises. The shikaras are of different type based on the size and shape. The shikaras are of different type based on the size and shape. Next style, Dravida style. South Indian temple style is different from the Nagara temple. The front wall has an entrance gateway in its center, which is known as Gopuram. South Indian temple style is different from the Nagara temple. The front wall has an entrance gateway in its center, which is known as Gopuram. Intricately curved Vimana on top of the sanctum and pillaried halls. Intricately curved Vimana on top of the sanctum and pillaried halls. Among the early Chola temples are the Vijayalaya Choleshwara temple at Narthamalai and Koranganatha temple at Srinivasanallur. Among the early Chola temples are the Vijayalaya Choleshwara temple at Narthamalai and Koranganatha temple at Srinivasanallur. The third style, Veshara style. The Veshara style of also called the Chalukyan type possessed the Dravidian Vimana and the Nagara type faceted walls. Third one, Veshara style. The Veshara style also called the Chalukyan type possessed the Dravidian Vimana and the Nagara type faceted walls. The Jain temple of Lakundi, the Mukteshwara temple of Chaudandambur and the Mahadeva temple at Ittagi are some of the examples of Veshara style. The fourth style of temple building is Hoysala style. Hoysala style. The Hoysalas who succeeded the later Chalukyas evolved a new style of architecture. Hoysala style. The Hoysalas who succeeded the later Chalukyas evolved a new style of architecture. The Hoysala temples are not square but polygonal or star-shaped temples. The best known example of the Hoysala style is the famous Hoysaleshwara temple at Halibut or Dwasamudra. The best known example of the Hoysala style of the famous Hoysaleshwara temple at Halibut or Dwasamudra. The essential characteristics of these temples are the high bases or plinths which follow all the windings of the temple and thus offer a huge length of vacant space to be elaborately carved with sculptures. The essential characteristics of these temples are the high bases or plinths which follow all the windings of the temple and thus offers huge length of vacant space to be elaborately carved with sculptures. Alvas. In the post-Gupta period, Vaishnava saints were popularly known as Alvas in South India. In the post-Gupta period, Vaishnava saints were popularly known as Alvas in South India. They preached Vaishnavism and their songs in Tamil were collectively named as Prabandhas. What? Prabandhas. They preached Vaishnavism and their songs in Tamil were collectively named as Prabandhas. Next one, Nayanas. Nayanas were Shiva saints who preached Shaivism in South India. Nayanas were Shiva saints who preached Shaivism in South India. Alvas and Nayanas played a great part in propagating it. Ganarajya. The 6th century BC saw the emergence of the large number of states in North India which were ruled by republics or oligarchies which were called Ganarajya. The 6th century BC saw the emergence of the large number of states in northern India which were ruled by republics or oligarchies which were called Ganarajya. K.P. Jaiswal laid emphasis on the term Gana as a republican form of constitution. K.P. Jaiswal laid emphasis on the term Gana as a republic form of constitution. The term Ganasangha or Ganarajya refers to the claim to be equal status. The term Ganasangha or Ganarajya refers to the claim to be equal status. Janapadas. Vedic texts point out that Aryan tribes were called Janas. Vedic texts point out that Aryan tribes were called Janas. Vedic Samhitas point out term Jana denotes tribe whose members believed in shared ancestry. Initially, Janapada was gathering places of men, merchants and artisans akin to marketplace or town surrounded by villages. The Janapadin was the ruler of Janapada. The Janapadin was the ruler of Janapada. The Janapadin was the ruler of Janapada. Every Janapada was politically named as Rashtra. Every Janapada was politically named as Rashtra. Agraharas. Village was the basic unit of Chola administration. The villages of mainly of three types. Agraharas or Brahmadeya was the second type of villages which was granted to the Brahmins and was entirely inhabited by them. They were exempted from tax and were prosperous. Agraharas or Brahmadeya was the second type of villages which was granted to the Brahmins and was entirely inhabited by them. They were exempted from tax and were prosperous. Shreni. In North India, trade guilds were known as Shrenis. In North India, trade guilds were known as Shrenis. These Shrenis had often consisted of people belonging to different castes. They had their own rules of conduct which the members were legally bound to obey and were entered to lend or borrow money or receive endowments. Chauth. Shivaji started the system of Chauth. Maratha ruler Shivaji supplemented his income by levying a contribution on the neighboring Mughal territories. This contribution, which came to 1/4 of the land revenue, began to be called Chauthai 1/4 or Chauth. Maratha ruler Shivaji supplemented his income by levying a contribution on the neighboring Mughal territories. This contribution, which came to 1/4 of the land revenue, began to be called Chauthai 1/4 or Chauth. It was a payment in lieu of protection against the invasion of the third power. It was a payment in lieu of protection against the invasion of a third power. Polygas. In Vijayanagar, the king granted Amara or territory with a fixed revenue to military chiefs. These chiefs, who were called Palayagar or Palagar or Nayaks, had to maintain a fixed number of foot soldiers, horses and elephants for the service of the state. They formed a very powerful section and sometimes it was difficult for the government to control them. They formed a very powerful section and sometimes it was difficult for the government to control them. Next one, Hundi. Bills of exchange. In large transactions, coinage was supplemented to a considerable extent by credit money and thus arose in Europe out of the development of a brisk use of the negotiable bills of exchange, known in India as hundis or hindavis. The hundis often included insurance which was charged at different rates on the basis of value of the goods, destination, means of transport, land, river or sea, etc. Saraf. The business of hundis was mainly in the hands of the professional money changers, the saraf or shroffs. Sarafs also accepted money at interest. The sarafs invested the deposits at 1 to 2.5, running some hazard for the same. They also at times lend to persons of quality at very high rate sums, which could not be recalled at short notice. They also at times lend to persons of quality at very high rate sums, which could not be recalled at short notice. Jagir. Jagir was a land revenue yielding land which was assigned to the Mughal officials in lieu of cash salary. Jagir was a land revenue yielding land which was assigned to the Mughal officials in lieu of cash salary. The income of the Jagir was equal to the salary and allowances of the Jagirdar. The income of the Jagir was equal to the salary and allowances of the Jagirdar. The Jagir assigned in lieu of cash salary was known as Tangwa Jagir or salary of Jagir. The Jagir assigned in lieu of cash salary was known as Tangwa Jagir or salary of Jagir. Non-Tangwa Jagirs were Madai Mash, Aima grants, etc. Non-Tangwa Jagirs were Madai Mash, Aima grants, etc. Dastur. Dastur ul Amal or Dastur was the fixed cash revenue rates for each crop issued under the Zabti system of revenue assessment. Dastur ul Amal or Dastur was the fixed cash revenue rates for each crop issued under the Zabti system of revenue assessment. The Dastur ul Amals were the price schedules of various agricultural crops for converting the state demand in kind into cash. For this purpose, the empire was divided into a number of homogeneous agricultural regions called dasturs. For this purpose, the empire was divided into a number of homogeneous agricultural regions called dasturs. Deshmukh. Deshmukh were the Zamindars in Hindu-governed Deccan states. When Shivaji came into power, he laid the foundation of a strong state by curbing the power of the Deshmukhs. When Shivaji came into power, he laid the foundation of a strong state by curbing the power of the Deshmukhs. Nadu. The Vijayanagar kingdom was divided into Rajyas or Mandalam or provinces, below which were Nadu or district, Sthala and Grama or village. Pargana. By the middle of the 14th century, the basic collection of villages as an administrative unit came to be called Pargana. An Indian name, the Sanskrit original was probably Pratiganga. By the middle of the 14th century, the basic collection of villages as an administrative unit came to be called Pargana. An Indian name, the Sanskrit original was probably Pratiganga. Chaudhary was the hereditary Zamindar held answerable for the collection of revenue in each Pargana. The most important people in the village were the Khut, landowners, and Mukaddam. The most important people in the village were the Khut or landowners and Mukaddam. Next one, Altmaga. The term Altmaga used for a grant under seal for a special or fixed tenure or land grant introduced by the Emperor Jahangir. This grant called Altmaga because Emperor's seal known by the same name was fixed on these grants. These grants were given to certain Muslim nobles in the form of Jagiri Vatan or home Jagirs. These grants were given to certain Muslim nobles in the form of Jagri Vatan or home Jagirs. Kara. The term Kara referred to a periodical tax levied primarily upon the agricultural land during the early medieval period, that is 650 to 1000 AD. Whereas Karai was used for the land tax and it was the main source of income during the Sangam age. Next one, Vishti. Vishti was the term used for forced labor in the beginning of medieval period. What is? Vishti was the term used for forced labor in the beginning of medieval period. Mostly, Shudras were targeted for forced labor by the Zamindars. The peasants also had to render forced labor or Vishti. Mostly, Shudras were targeted for forced labor by the Zamindars. The peasants also had to render forced labor or Vishti. Next one, Bhaga. Bhaga is one of the 12 Adityas, a group of deities known as the sun god described in the Bhagavata Purana. In Sanskrit, Bhaga means a portion. Bhaga is one of the 12 Adityas, a group of deities known as the sun god described in the Bhagavata Purana. In Sanskrit, Bhaga means a portion. A portion. Adityas are different from avatars of Lord Vishnu in the form of sun god Surya, also known in Vedic traditions as Bhagavan. Adityas are different from avatars of Lord Vishnu in the form of sun god Surya, also known in Vedic traditions as Bhagavan. Next one, Ikta. What is Ikta? Iqtidari system was a unique feature of the Sultan. Iqtidari system was a unique feature of the Sultan. From the beginning of Turkish rule, the country was divided into a number of tracts called Iqtas, which were parcelled among the military leaders. From the beginning of Turkish rule, the country was divided into a number of tracts called Iqtas, which were parcelled among the military leaders. These holders, called Iqtadas, maintained law and order, collected land revenue due to state, kept a certain sum for the cost of administration and their personal expenses, and sent the rest to the Sultan. These holders, called Iqtadas, maintained law and order, collected land revenue due to the state, kept a certain sum for the cost of administration and their personal expenses, and sent the rest to the Sultan. However, the Iqtadas were not the real owners of the land and could be transferred from the place to place. Transferred from place to place. Iqta was an assignment of land in lieu of salary. Iqta was an assignment of land in lieu of salary. Jizya. It was an Islamic poll tax imposed on non-Muslims in lieu of the protection that the state apparently gave them. Akbar abolished jizya in 1564. Akbar abolished jizya in 1564. Jizya was hated by the Hindus because it was symbol of their inferiority and involved a lot of humiliation. The jizya was to be paid by all the non-Muslims in India. The jizya was to be paid by all the non-Muslims in India. Next one, Zakat. It is a form of charity which is treated in Islam as a religious obligation or tax. It's a form of charity which is treated in Islam as a religious obligation or tax. It literally means that which purifies. It literally means that which purifies. It is one of the 5 pillars of the Islam. It is one of the 5 pillars of the Islam. Zakat collectors collect the amount and pay to the poor and needy. It is considered a way to purify one's income and wealth, which sometimes become impure with the ways of acquisition. It is considered a way to purify one's income and wealth, which sometimes becomes impure with the ways of acquisition. Mansab. Literally a place or position, thus it means a rank in the Mughal noble hierarchy. A place or position, thus it means a rank in the Mughal noble hierarchy. In the Mansab system of the Mughals, it denoted, first one, the status of a Mansab holder in the hierarchy. The status of a Mansab holder in the hierarchy. Next, they pay due to the holder, Mansabdar. They pay due to the holder, Mansabdar, and obligation on the Mansab holder to maintain a specified number of horses and equipments. A Mansab holder was mostly a noble. A Mansab holder was a mostly noble. Next, Shahnai Mandi. For the purpose of fixing the cost of all commodities from food grains, sugar and cooking oil to a needle, and from costly imported cloth to horses, cattle and slave boys and girls, Alauddin Khilji set up 3 markets at Delhi. First one market for food grains, and then next one, second for costly cloth, and then third for horses, slaves and cattle. One market for food grains, second for costly cloth, and third one for horses, slaves and cattle. Each market was under the control of a high officer called Shahna, who maintained a register of the merchants and strictly controlled the shopkeepers and the prices. Each market was under the control of a high officer called Shahna, who maintained a register of the merchants and strictly controlled the shopkeepers and the prices. Next one, mercantilism. Economic system of the major European trading nations during the 16th to 18th centuries was based on the objective of accumulating billion through exporting more goods rather than importing them. The balance being met by import of bullion. Their aims were sought to be achieved by importing monopolies, navigation acts, high duties on imports, a ban on export on bullion, etc. Their aims were sought to be achieved by importing monopolies, navigation acts, high duties on imports, a ban on export on bullion, etc. Economic nationalism. Economic nationalism. The criticism of British economic exploitation of India and the movement for control of taxation and economic policy by Indians formed the substance of Indian economic nationalism. The criticism of British economic exploitation of India and the movement for control of taxation and economic policy by Indians formed the substance of Indian economic nationalism. The first and the most prominent spokesman of which was Dadabhai Naoroji and also R.C. Dutt. Dadabhai Naoroji and also R.C. Dutt. The first and most prominent spokesman of which was Dadabhai Naoroji and also R.C. Dutt. Next point, Indian Renaissance. Indian Renaissance. Renaissance consists of the Latin re plus nasi meaning again and to be born. Renaissance consists of the Latin re plus nasi meaning again and to be born. As Renaissance is a revitalizing or a resurgence of past forces, views and traditions. The Renaissance in India was not like the Renaissance in Europe. It was essentially a matter of spirit which produced striking changes in the realm of religion, society and culture along with the demand for national regeneration. There rose new self-conscious among the people of India. Next, colonialism. Colonialism as a world system began in the 16th century AD. Colonialism as a world system began in the 16th century AD. It is the system in which colonies are maintained for the benefit, chiefly economic, of the controlling metropolitan countries. India was sought to be made into an unprotected market for British goods. This assured in the free trade phase. Three phases of colonialism were: first one, mercantilist, industrial and financial capital has been agreed upon. Three phases of colonialism. It's very important. Three phases of colonialism: mercantilist, industrial and financial capital has been agreed upon. Federalism. Federalism is a system of government in which many states participate with their own constitutions, laws and regulations. Federalism is a system of government in which many states participate with their own constitution, laws and regulations. The tendency to the form of a federation is called federalism. The tendency to the form of a federation is called federalism. In India, federalism developed as an official object of policy after the Government of India Act 1919. In India, federalism developed as an official object of policy after the Government of India Act 1919. Government of India Act 1919. Hierarchy. It means a form of government in which two persons, states or bodies are jointly vested with power. The Government of India Act of 1919 introduced changes in the provincial administration by establishing what is generally called hierarchy. The Government of India Act of 1919 introduced changes in the provincial administration by establishing what is generally called hierarchy. The provincial subjects were now divided into two parts, is reserved and transferred. The provincial subjects were now divided into two parts, reserved and transferred. Reserved and transferred. Utilitarianism. The theory propounded by Jeremy Bentham that everything has to be judged by its utility is called utilitarianism. The theory propounded by Jeremy Bentham, it's very important, Jeremy Bentham, that everything has to be judged by its utility is called utilitarianism. It became an influential trend in the administration of the East India Company. The utilitarian program for India involved a regular codification of law in spite of Bentham's own predilections for compromise with local customs. The utilitarianism demanded social reform in India. Next one, revivalism. Revivalism is term used for deviations from the purer form of Marxist theory. Some of the prominent left-wing thinkers who are accused for being revisionists include Rosa Luxemburg, Trotsky, etc. Some of the prominent left-wing thinkers who are accused for being revisionist include Rosa Luxemburg, Trotsky, etc. The tendency in a theory or ideology to aim at the restoration of what is conceived to be an earlier system of beliefs, laws, and ways of life. The tendency in a theory or ideology to aim at the restoration of what is conceived to be an earlier system of beliefs, laws, and ways of life. Next one, Orientalism. It means the views of the Occident about the Orient. It means the views of the Occident about the Orient. After the break of the compact society in Europe due to industrialization, the Orientalists looked on Indian society as characterizing that pre-industrial society of Europe and hence tried to preserve the society and ethos in India. They familiarized themselves with the study of the Orient with an interest. They familiarized themselves with the study of the Orient with an interest. Next one, communalism. A stream of thought which proposed all the individual benefits and mode of conflict on the basis of caste or religion. Communalism. A stream of thought which proposed all the individual benefits and mode of conflict on the basis of caste or religion. Then mixed economy. Mixed economy. In India, mixed economy has been regarded appropriate for establishing a society on socialist pattern. In India, mixed economy has been regarded appropriate for establishing a society on socialist pattern. In mixed economy, public and private sectors both coexist. In mixed economy, public and private sectors both coexist. Both these sectors are essential parts of the economy. Both these sectors are essential parts of the economy. Private sector also pays attention towards national priorities. Private sector also pays attention towards national priorities. Then imperialism. Imperialism. One of the remarkable features of the 19th century was the feverish attempt of the European powers to extend their control over the non-European world. One of the remarkable features of the 19th century was the feverish attempt of the European powers to extend their control over the non-European world. This expansion of power of one country over many weak countries was called imperialism. This expansion of power of one country over many weak countries was called imperialism. Next one, Black Death. What is Black Death? The term Black Death refers to a plague which occurred in the whole of Europe. It took heavy toll of 1/3 of the population. In England, the Black Death decimated half of the population. Peasants refused to work in the fields till their wages were raised. The term Black Death refers to a plague which occurred in the whole of Europe. It took heavy toll of 1/3 of the population. In England, the Black Death decimated half of the population. Peasants refused to work in the fields, their wages were raised. Apartheid. Apartheid was the official doctrine of the South African government and the ruling National Party between 1948 and 1991. Apartheid was the official doctrine of the South African government and the ruling National Party between 1948 and 1991. Meaning separateness. Meaning separateness. It was in practice nothing more than excuse for domination by the white minority population over blacks and colored racism. Meaning separateness, it was in practice nothing more than excuse for domination by the white minority population over blacks and colored racism. Apartheid consisted of a set of legal inequalities. Apartheid consisted of a set of legal inequalities. Next, Great Depression, 1929. The dislocation of economic machinery of all participants and even of neutrals during the World War I ultimately led to the worldwide economic depression of 1929. The dislocation of economic machinery of all participants and even of neutrals during the World War I ultimately led to the worldwide economic depression of 1929. The chief characteristics of this Great Depression was a slump in the money market and fall in the trade and commerce. The chief characteristics of this Great Depression was a slump in the money market and fall in trade and commerce. This economic distress gave rise to unprecedented worldwide unrest and sometimes direct hostilities among the nations during the 1930s. Next, Oriental despotism. The concept of Oriental despotism popularized by the German sociologist Karl Wittfogel. The concept of Oriental despotism popularized by the German sociologist Karl Wittfogel. It is form of government in which a single entity rules with absolute power. It is form of government in which a single entity rules with absolute power. In sum, Oriental despotism is an intellectually stimulating concept. In sum, Oriental despotism is an intellectually stimulating concept. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for trying to do something new. Please share our channel to your friends. And watch, like and subscribe. Thank you. Thank you very much.